Welcome back to Photo Australia. In this episode, Grant talks a bit more about the story behind the AV, and we will then take some of that information and try and implement that into him actually speaking onto the AV instead of using titles. So I hope you enjoy the story.
But to the trip, Brad, as you see there, we kicked off in Edmonton, beautiful city, and this was a great trip in that it's in 3 stages. You go Edmonton to Jasper on the transcontinental train, and then you are overnight in Jasper and you catch the Skeena train. Is called the Skeena, like it follows the Skeena River in Canada, and then you take that to Prince George, and then you're overnight there. A crew takes the train on each leg. So we had a crew that took the train from Jasper to Prince George, an engineering crew, the drivers. They then stay in Prince George, and a different crew takes it from Prince George to Prince Rupert.
Yep.
That is because, as you've seen from some of those photos, it's pretty rugged country that this train travels through, and the engineers are aware of every inch of that track. So they're quite aware of what they're going into, what to expect. So the Prince George to Prince Rupert people will take it to Prince Rupert and then back to Prince George, and then the Prince George crew pick it up and take it back to Jasper. Now, if you can just roll on a bit, and it was interesting when we left Edmonton. This blizzard was overnight, and the next morning.
So this was the first part of your trip, was a blizzard.
Yeah, that's right. This is from the hotel window the night before we were leaving. We were leaving at something like 6 a.m. in the morning, and our taxi driver was a bit perplexed in the morning because he loaded us up at the hotel and driving down the road, and he couldn't find the entry into the train station because the snow was so thick it had covered over the driveways. So you're driving along in this, the taxi was literally ploughing through powder snow, and he's going, the curb, the entrance, the driveway is around here somewhere. It took us a couple of goes to find it. He sort of would nudge up to where he thought it was, and we'd hit the curb, and he'd back off, and he'd keep, it's here somewhere. Well, eventually we made it to the station anyway. But so we made our way to Jasper, and this is as we're leaving.
This is
Edmonton.
the blizzard, yeah.
It's the day after the blizzard. And now all these shots, folks, are generally taken through perspex windows on the train, and none of which were all that sort of clean, or perspex is very opaque.
It is, but it's still worth, and this AV puts it together as well, is that story shots are very important. So it's the journey of your trip.
Yep.
And even though the conditions mightn't be ideal, a quick snap of where you are to follow the story from start to finish makes all the difference. Because you need those story shots to support your hero shots.
And it is, look, there's a certain, we've done all our travel prior to this trip, and I'll say since, by road. We hire cars and drive ourselves. This is the first trip we ever did where we didn't do that, where we used public transport like train and boats, ferries, etc. Sitting back in the train, watching the world slide by, and you're in a nice heated compartment and feeling quite good, and looking out at all that on that first day was quite humbling, actually. Sort of, you felt quite privileged to be in that warm, safe environment, looking out at a very harsh environment. So you get into Jasper, beautiful town, and the cloud had all lifted by the time we arrived. You stay the night in Jasper, and you catch the Skeena the next morning. This is the train from Edmonton. As you can see, the ice hanging off of that. It was
cold, so to speak.
Brad, we stepped out of the heated train into that, and like it almost hurt to breathe. It was that cold. It sort of hit your lungs, and great trip nonetheless. So we've left that train at this point. Our hotel's there on the right, and then the next day, you reboard the Skeena for the first time, and away you go. Skeena is a very small train, as you'll see later, and this is the journey past the base of Mount Robson, which is just beautiful, and people say, "Oh, Canada." Now, I'm in the back carriage there of the train, and that's the entire train that you're looking at. You're looking down those tunnels of, the out the back window of the train, looking back there. It's just quite amazing.
But one thing I love this shot is your compositions and your storytelling of these shots. You know, you're on a train and you might be thinking, oh, well, there's no photo opportunities, but you've taken heaps of shots out of the train, which has made the story of this AV.
Yeah, the crew were getting a bit annoyed at me climbing up on the roof at this stage and lying on the roof taking those shots. But, I assured
Only
them,
in Canada.
Yeah, no. This is the dome car, and you get to the very front of the dome car, and you got the window looking to the front. So we've had the night in Prince George, and we'll just pause it here for a second, Brad.
Sure.
And when we got to the train at the station that next morning, it's only about 25, 30 people on the train. So it's a very small, congenial little group of people that you're travelling with. You get to know each other fairly quickly. And it stops at every little town on this road. So people are getting on and off all the time. So your travelling companions are changing. Anyway, we get to the train, and you walk into situations and you just feel a bit of tension in the air. You walked into a room or something and felt that
a few tense people.
Yeah, there's something. There's a few glances going on between people, and people are a bit distracted. Well, when we got to the station and boarded the train and spoke to the crew, the same crew we'd been with the day before, there was just something wasn't right. Anyway, thought no more of it. Off we went. So we're chuffing along in the train, and we get into the journey by a few hours, and one of my travelling companions, and he shows in the picture here later, said to me, do you reckon the train's going a bit slower? Now, one of the really cool things about train travel that we worked out is that, we're cruising along at 10:30 in the morning and all's cool, and we're looking at our watches and thinking, well, it's got to be 5 o'clock in the world somewhere. We're not driving, so perhaps we could have a beer or a glass of red. So we've kicked back. We're sort of getting right into this train travel. And yes, the train was noticeably slower. At this point, my wife Anne made the comment that outside the ladies' restroom was a big electronic board that the previous day was all lit up. And she said she'd just come back from the restroom and there was only one light lit up on this board, and that was the light saying emergency power. Okay. So if you just creep on a bit more, but we're having this discussion and saying, well, this is a bit, and you could feel the train going
You're
a little bit
back
faster.
on the train there again.
Yeah, back up on the roof again. Get off, Mr. And you could hear so this is like we've stopped here for lunch, or to let passengers off. And they made the comment to us at this point in time that they used to refuel here, and you would go off and have lunch in this hotel. I thought that'd be nice to do. It'd be a lovely way to have a little look at the town. This is the train, of course. You can see how big it is, just the carriage and the two carriages and the engine. There's the engine driver. And honestly, I didn't touch anything up there, Brad. What's to come had nothing to do with me whatsoever. So we've got underway again, and this is when we start to note the train is slowing. Now, these signs, by the way, they put up for the tourists. This is the mythical moose sign, just to say to the tourists, oh yes, there could be moose out here somewhere. Yeah, right. Oh, Canada, indeed. Moose. Ha. Hello, Jim. Hello, Dave. So, as we'll find my travelling, there we go, here we go.
Okay, all right.
The guy on the left over here, this is about the time he said half an hour before this, oh, you reckon the train's going slower? I said, well, yeah, now you mention it. Oh, we've had that discussion. In comes Bruce, lower right. Now, Bruce is one of the two conductors or staff on the train, other than the two engineers that are driving the thing. And he said, yeah, we have a little problem, folks. The train is the engine. We have a problem with the engine. It's stopped. And we're just coasting at this point. But don't worry, it's all downhill, and we're going to pull into a little town called New Hazelton and see what we can find out is the problem. And at this stage, they're saying, oh, is anyone on board an engineer, diesel engineer or mechanical engineer? And everyone's going very quiet. And I've said, well, no, I'm not an engineer, but I've operated diesels for a long time. So, oh, you're an engineer. Anyway, so as we move the film on, the slides show on, go where we're stopped. Here we go. Right. So we've coasted to a stop in this little town called New Hazelton, and we've all got off. Now, I've got off with the crew out the front door of the rear carriage, and I'm walking up towards the engine with the crew member as an engineer steps down out of the cabin and walks back, and halfway along, just under the Canadian flag, bottom right of the Canadian flag, are the big saddled fuel tanks. Well, he's got a rubber mallet in his hand. Now, all around us here are huge mountains. In fact, the lowest mountain is what we're actually looking at, but behind us is massive mountains. So he walks up to the big saddle fuel tank on the side of the train with this rubber mallet and hits the fuel tank. Now, those of you that know what an empty 44-gallon drum or any metal large container sounds like when it's empty and it's hit hard, gives out an almighty echoey sound. Well, that's what came off this fuel tank on the train. So I've looked at the conductor and I said, I think I might know what your problem is. Oh, wonderful, you can fix, I diagnosed the problem. And he's calling this out to the engineer who's up by the fuel tank. We're about halfway along the second carriage by now. The engineer's trying to escape back into the cabin as fast as he can. And anyway, he's unscrewed the top of the fuel cap. And you could almost hear the air hissing in, and sort of misty dust came out of it as he lifted off the tank, the fuel tap. We were out of fuel. Can you believe it? We had run a train out of fuel. So I'm down on hands and knees looking underneath for diesel spill, because any of you that have operated diesels know that if you have a diesel leak, it's really oily, dirty stuff, and it'll adhere itself to any surface, and it'll create whatever dust is around and dirt and grit, and it's quite obvious that you've got a diesel leak. No, she's all clean underneath, so there's no diesel leak. Interesting. So now the other engineers come down, and there's really, really cross words going on now. Cut a very long story short, they used to stop. Remember I said they used to stop the train in McBride and refuel while the passengers went off and had lunch? They now stopped it in Prince George overnight, and they were supposed to refuel in Prince George. Now, for whatever reason, it didn't happen. No one's checked that the train was actually refueled overnight. As I said to the guy, I said, well, surely you'd expect the receipt tucked under the windscreen wiper or something, from the fuel company. You wouldn't expect to accept that much fuel and not have some sort of receipt of it. And that was, one of the ladies came up to me and she said, oh, just before you arrived at the station this morning, there was a real to-do between those two drivers over refuelling of the train that she had overheard. I said, what about the fuel gauge? Hasn't been working for a month. And that there were fuel gauges on the tanks. Oh, but we didn't read those. We only read the one in the cabin that's not working. Oh dear. So anyway, there we are. No fuel.
It's good to have a train just sitting on the tracks with no fuel, isn't it?
Well, hey, great point.
It's not like that. There's no other trains coming, is there?
Well, you make a very, very good point, because we're on a spur line here. We pulled off the main line because the previous day and this morning of this trip, every so often we would have to get off the main line onto a spur line as a grain train went through. Now, these grain trains went through at breakneck speed, pulling over 100 carriages of grain. because Prince Rupert is a major grain exporting terminal, and this railway line links it right through to the prairies, the Canadian prairies, which are big wheat and barley growing areas. So what had happened, when the train coughed, they were actually at the top of a mountain, and the engineers, by knowing that section of track, knew that they could get down to here, because they'd actually dummy run this before. If they'd pulled off at that point in time, where it first coughed and they realised that something was amiss, we would have had a several mile walk out on a track in snow. So they decided not to do that, and we are very thankful for them for making that decision. So we've coasted into here, got onto the spur line, and we've got out. So the story goes on. They then are going to order a fuel tanker and refuel the train and go back on the main line. And I wasn't very comfortable with that, because any of us that have dealt with diesels know that if you suck a diesel completely dry, you know, you're going to cause a lot of trouble in pumps and filters and blah, blah, blah. And I said to them, well, if we go back on and this thing stops again, how can we get on? Can we coast to another safe point or not? And he said, no, we've been coming downhill to here, but from here on now we go uphill and downhill. So if it stops on us now, we are stranded on the main line. And I said, well, you can refuel it if you like, and you can put in fresh filters, but I ain't going to ride on it until that pump is pulled down and properly cleaned and properly put back together. So they ordered us a bus. We came back on a bus in the dark.
Sounds like it was a fun trip until up to then, Grant.
Well, it was an interesting trip, Brad. It was an interesting trip. But then, two of our passengers were really panicking on the train, because they were supposed to catch the Queen of the North that night, which was going northwards at that point. And so they actually phoned ahead and held the Queen of the North back, waiting for these two people to board it. So the next, I think they were going up to the Queen Charlotte Islands and then back down, and they were doing the ride up and then the ride back down to Port Hardy, and then it was coming back up, and then we were going to board it and then continue on. On the TV news the next morning, when I was staying at a cousin's place in Terrace, and there's these two people who'd been on the train with us the night before or the day before, standing there wrapped in a grey blanket being interviewed about their escape off the Queen of the North ferry, who had hit a rock, off course, new GPS system, all that stuff. Look it up on Wikipedia. It tells the story and tells all the facts about it. Yeah, she hit rocks off course and went down, and unfortunately two people died, and they didn't get two people off. And terrible story. But there we are. We turned up at the Prince Rupert Terminal and no boat. That was one of the search vessels there, I think, that was out looking for things. And that's the grain terminal that they load the grain. So planes, trains, and ships, right?
Yep. Then you decide to jump on a
horse. No, horse is much safer, mate.
I was about to say, then you jumped on an aircraft.
Oh, well, yeah, sorry.
I was going to say, you haven't quite finished there, Grant.
I haven't quite
The
finished
moral of this story is don't go with Grant on
right.
any photography trips.
Yes, that's right. So here we are. We're in Prince Rupert, and of course our boat isn't picking us up. The company's very nicely refunded us our fare on the spot. That's wonderful. Here we're still stuck in Prince Rupert, so we chose to, that's a fair drive back to Vancouver from there, so we chose to fly back. So we boarded our Fokker Friendship aircraft and off we went. And if any of you that have flown in a Fokker, you know they're a very safe aircraft, but we're coming into land in Vancouver and we fly straight into a storm. So here we are.
Blizzard.
Yep.
No fuel.
No.
boat sank,
Yep, and I buy a bloody air ticket.
and fly into a storm.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly.
So when are you selling the movie rights to that one?
Oh dear. So yes, no, we're up there bouncing around in this pocket, and I'm thinking, oh God, really? I actually bought a plane ticket after all this. So anyway, but it was all good. They got us down. We're safe. We're here to talk about it.
Yep. So getting back to your AV now, Grant.
Yep.
So you've covered with putting writing on the AV.
Mm-hmm.
What I suggest now is, for our next episode, is that we strip the writing. We'll open up AV Studio,
Mm-hmm.
and we do a voice recording, and we'll add that, and we'll show you what we do, what we use.
Yep.
When we do our voice recording, which we'll do here. And we'll put that voice recording to this AV and see what the difference is through having writing coming across the screen and voiceover. Because I think you'll find, well, either prove me right or wrong, but I think we'll find that you'll be able to pack in a lot more of that story, which is an absolute incredible story, but you can't put that full story in with the AV. And you wouldn't be able, and you won't be able to do it with your voice either.
No.
But I think you'll find you'll be able to pack in more story through your narration over the AV, and it'll be interesting to see what the differences will be from your writing to a voiceover. So I think that'd be a good thing to show how we do that. And a bit of a step-by-step with that, and we'll make another episode. But this will give you a bit of an idea of where we're at. We're at a sort of polishing stage of the AV, and it should be good to see what we can do with it from now.
Indeed, Brad, and I look forward to doing that, because it is a... I've told this story a few times, and a lot of people don't believe me that it actually did happen. Well, it is... It's all true, folks. It really did happen.
Yeah, I don't believe you, Grant. You just full of it.
Yeah, and it's quite an incredible story. But to be able to put it together, and this is the beauty of AVs. You can have these pictures, and I can look at them, and it all comes back to me. But showing it to somebody else and trying to explain, and I can't show them one picture in this without telling the whole story.
And that's what AVs are, though. They're storytelling.
It's all interlinked. It's all interlinked, and it's just a travel log. It's just a picture of our trip, but it happened to be a trip that was rather eventful. So that is what the AV is all about. It's putting this together in a form that, when I've got it done, I'm going to be able to get Brad over for dinner one night, and we'll sit there and play it and have a really good laugh about it and go, wow, that really did happen after all. So there we are. That's what we'll do, and I look forward to that.
Okay, well, we might hold that episode right there, and we will continue on in another episode, and we'll go straight into voice recording in the next episode.
Beautiful. See you later, folks.
So, if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button, ring the bell if you want notifications, and with that, we'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.
See you later.